peace, my request. Patriots, this one's for you.
Welcome to Patriots Central Radio with Jeremy Dawson and Steve Balestriei.
New England, what up?
International show report.
Yeah, we on the road. The Pats going ham for the Super Bowl. Brady got the ball and it's all good. Get another ring.
And welcome back to Patriots Central Radio. I'm Steve Balestriei, your host for today. Jeremy Dawson is unavailable today, but we have a special guest co-host, my old buddy Russ Goldman from PatsFans.com. Russ, how are you today?
I'm good, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
Well, how could I say no, Russ? I mean, for those of our listeners that aren't aware, that Russ and I have been doing a podcast for PatsFans.com for the past almost 3 years now. And I actually, Russ, to lead into this, I was trying to get our third amigo, Derek Havens, on as a guest, but he was unavailable this week. And I would have loved to have heard that interview with you and Derek. So,
Well, to be honest with you, Steve, to be honest with you, I would love to ask Derek questions.
But yes, training camp is getting ready to start. There's a lot of issues, Aaron Hernandez notwithstanding, and I think there's going to be a lot of great position battles this year in training camp. And we got some great guests lined up on the show. We have Oliver Thomas from Any Pats Draft, and also writes for the Bleacher Report. We have Pat James from the Fantasy Council, and we also have Russ Baxter, who's also known as Bax Football Guru. And so this is going to be a great show today.
Absolutely, Steve. And listen, you can never have enough Russells on a show.
Yes, you're absolutely right, my friend. And, looking forward to Patriots training camp this year, what do you think is going to be the biggest positional battle in terms of where you see the biggest turnover going on this year?
I would have to say it's going to be at the wide receiver position because the Patriots have lost several wide receivers. We recently saw them let go of my good friend, and why am I blanking on my good friend Brandon Lloyd? Brandon Lloyd, and I'm blanking on Brandon Lloyd. That just tells you how much I enjoy Brandon Lloyd. Listen, they've had serious turnover at the wide receiver position, and I think that's where most of the interest from Patriots fans is going to be. Who's going to take the place of Wes Welker? Listen, we hope it's going to be Danny Amendola. Who's going to take the place of, say, Brandon Lloyd? Will it be Josh Boyce, or could it be Aaron Dobson, or could it be Donald Jones? Or who knows? Maybe it'll still be Michael Jenkins. There's so much going on at that position. That's where I think mostly fans are going to be looking at.
Absolutely. And, a guy not to go to sleep on at that outside receiver position, and I think we'll see a lot of that, at least during training camp, will be Julian Edelman. And we saw that last year, that they split him out wide quite a bit. And he had some success split out wide. And I wouldn't be surprised if they work him into that system as well. And then there's going to be a lot of, new faces that, well, not actually new, but different faces at the starting roles at tight end. And we see a lot of guys coming in at defensive tackle, when you got new faces coming in. And with defensive end, I think training camp is going to be really fun to watch this year.
I couldn't agree more, Steve. And I've said on our show that the position I'm going to be looking at is defensive tackle, because I think that's a position where potentially, and I want to use the word potentially, the Patriots have upgraded with bringing in Armand Armstead and Tommy Kelly, and those two will hopefully do a very good job and be able to get after the quarterback this year. A position where the Patriots have lacked has been the interior pass rush to go along with Vince Wilfork, and I'll be looking to see if one of those guys can step up.
Absolutely. In fact, our first guest, that's what we're going to talk about right away, was the defensive tackle position. So let's get ready to bring on Oliver Thomas. And joining us now on Patriots Central is Oliver Thomas. Oliver is a journalism student at UNH, but he's also an accomplished writer. He writes for New England Patriots Draft.com. He also writes for the Bleacher Report, and he's a contributor to Yahoo Sports. If you haven't followed Oliver, you should, because this is a guy that's up and coming. You're going to hear a lot of his name in the future. Oliver, welcome to Patriots Central. You're on with Steve and Russ.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate the kind words.
Not at all. Not at all. We're very excited to have you on here. I know we chat all the time on Twitter, so I get to actually put a voice to a face now.
Yes. Well, this is my voice.
Well, let's jump right into it. I know with training camp getting ready to start, the Patriots, they're going to have a lot of positional battles going on. Russ and I were just mentioning the defensive tackle position. And we'd like to get your thoughts on how you think this is all going to shake out when the season starts.
Well, I think everyone's already casted Tommy Kelly and Armand Armstead as the two candidates to start next to Vince Wilfork. And it's really hard to tell at this point because the pads haven't come on yet. Yeah. So when I look at Tommy Kelly, and I think that he's probably the candidate to start right away, because knowing the way Belichick seems to operate, it's not really about talent for the future necessarily as much as it is what you can do right now. And I think that Armstead will definitely be a factor, but it's hard to imagine. But he's 22 years old. It's remarkable. I think that Tommy Kelly could very well come in and play a lot of snaps. He played almost, I think, 800 defensive snaps, upwards of like 760 defensive snaps last season for the Raiders. And that's more than Red Bryant, B.J. Raji, and Barry Cofield. So he's going to play a lot of snaps, I believe. And if he can be shades of what he was 2 years ago, that would probably be excellent for the Patriots.
Absolutely. And, with Armstead, if he's effective, he can limit some of that wear and tear on both Kelly and Wilfork, and then you have a nice rotation going, and that'll just make them pressure legs at the end of the game always makes a big difference.
Yes, absolutely. I think that Armstead has a lot of versatility, probably out of the 5-tech and the 3-tech. He could probably play some defensive end and a 3-man front. I'm really excited to see how he performs. I hope that he'll be a big factor, at least as a rotational guy early on.
Absolutely. And, Russ was just mentioning before you came on the air that, one of the things that the Patriots have lacked the last few years has been that interior pass rush. And with the addition of these two guys, we could conceivably see that, really become an area of strength now.
Yeah, I think I'm writing an article right now about Tommy Kelly, actually, and it's funny because I was looking at the numbers over the past couple of years. I think they've had 5 different guys starting at defensive tackle next to Wilfork since 2010. So it'd be nice if they could find some continuity there. It'd be very beneficial for the front.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into wide receiver now, because I know that's what everybody in New England is all worried about, is the wide receiver core. And a lot of people are saying that this is the worst group of receivers Brady's had since 2006. I'm tempted to err on the side of caution there, but at the same time, I think there's some talent here. How do you feel about this wide receiver core?
Well, whenever you're compared to 2006, you gotta live up to some lofty expectations there. But I think that it'll surprise some people, honestly. The toughest part is Tom Brady will have to find a safety valve. Is that going to be Amendola? Is that going to be another veteran like maybe Michael Jenkins? Who knows? He's been very consistent over his NFL career. Nothing spectacular, but he'll he is what he is, and he'll definitely, if he can kind of get a rapport with Brady, that would go a long way towards this offense. But, you got a lot of young guys in there, and it's interesting because a lot of sleeper candidates like Kamar Aiken, Kenbrell Tompkins, they've gotten a lot of praise over the last few weeks for their efforts in minicamp and OTAs, and I'm curious to see how that will turn over to training camp, and if you'll see guys like Josh Boyce and Aaron Dobson maybe step up a little bit. I know Josh Boyce was hurt, but yeah, there's a lot of question marks there, but we'll see shortly, I'm sure.
Well, Russ, I know you have some input on the wide receiver, conundrum, I guess you could say right now. What do you got for Oliver?
Yeah, Oliver, I actually just want to ask you about Danny Amendola. Last season, he had 63 receptions for 666 yards with St. Louis in 11 games. Interesting comparison is Wes Welker's last season in Miami, he caught 67 receptions for 687 yards. Amendola's reception and yardage could seriously go up with Brady throwing him the ball compared to, say, Sam Bradford. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's hard. I would say it's hard to disagree with that. Those are some very comparable numbers there, I must say. I don't like to compare Welker and Amendola too much, but I know that they definitely do have some similarities, and I think that Amendola will probably, I see him as someone that will get, I could see 80 catches. That's kind of my baseline right now. I don't know. I'm not going to throw him as a 100-catch guy at this point just because we haven't seen that yet in his career, but it's certainly in the realm of possibility. I think Amendola is probably a little more of a dynamic, maybe a little more vertical threat than Welker was, but I think that he could definitely reach those numbers and make that leap kind of like Welker did in his last year from Miami to the Patriots.
Listen, I agree with you. That's why I wanted to bring up the comparison. More just about the numbers in this case, like you said, the players are a little bit different, whereas Amendola might have more upside as being more dynamic vertically, which would be a bonus, seriously.
Yeah.
I want to transition over to talk about the tight ends because you wrote a couple weeks ago about the Patriots tight end depth. I want to ask you specifically about Jake Ballard. He was out injured all of last season, but his last season with the Giants, he caught 38 passes for 604 yards. Talk about what he can possibly bring to the Patriots this year.
I think that Jake Ballard he's a big-bodied wide tight end, and he's obviously not the most exciting player to watch. I don't think that he's got great speed. I believe he ran, prior to going undrafted, I think he ran something like right on the cusp of like a 5-flat 40-yard dash. So he's not a burner by any means, and I don't think he's going to be any faster or more flexible, especially after those injuries and those surgeries to his knee and whatnot. But I think that he's going to be a very steady pass catcher for Brady, and, tandem with Gronk somehow. Probably, it's really hard to tell at this point, but I think he could, potentially be a guy that catches 30 or 40 passes. I'm not sure at this point because, you've heard reports that he looked stiff or whatnot, but I don't know. It's going to be an interesting storyline to monitor there, definitely with Jake Ballard.
It definitely will. Again, along with the wide receiver position, I think fans will be concentrated on the tight ends. And, again, I want to talk about a couple tight ends from last season, Daniel Fells and Who-Man. I don't want to dare say his name because I can't do it. So they both did a very nice job filling in for Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez when they were injured. What kind of role do you see these two players playing this season?
Well, I think that Fells and Mono Inui. Yeah, that's right.
You did it.
I did it. Yeah, I think that they're going to be what you think they are. If that makes any sense. I think I see them, if they do make the team, I see them both being utility blockers that can help out on running downs. And also, I know that both have a little bit of capability of playing a little bit of fullback. So those are some things to watch with them. I wouldn't expect them to, they didn't, catch a lot of passes last year. And even when they were subbed in, replacing Gronk and Hernandez, you didn't see them catch a lot of passes. That's not how they were utilized then either. So I wouldn't expect too much out of them, but if they make the team, they would be very effective in the roles that they have provided thus far, I think.
So listen, I'm glad that you brought up if they make the team because, again, it's not a definite that both of them will because, again, there are two other tight ends that you wrote about. You did a great article breaking down the tight end position. You talked about undrafted free agent Zach Sudfeld and Brandon Ford. Can you see either one of these players making the roster?
Definitely. It's, again, I hate to go back to this, but, we don't know too much without the pads on, but I think that both of them provide some different ability that the Patriots could definitely implement into the offense. I think you look at Zach Sudfeld, and he's a very solid blocker. He's not, really strong. I think he maybe benched 7 reps of 225 pounds at his pro day or whatever. But so he's more of a form blocker than he is, an overpowering blocker. But he could definitely help out in the blocking. And also in the red zone, he's shown a knack to come down with some receptions in his limited action that he got at Nevada during his senior year, or 6th-year senior year. And then you look at Brandon Ford. He was kind of another guy who didn't get much of an opportunity for other reasons, just because he was behind Dwayne Allen, who's now on the Indianapolis Colts. And he's very versatile. You could see him lining up in the seam as an H-back. He's a converted wide receiver, so there's a lot of ways he could be used, and it'll be really fun to see them this preseason and in training camp because they could definitely both make the team.
Wow, that's great, and I'll certainly be checking out these two tight ends. One final question for me that's still about the tight end position. Could you see the Patriots signing another tight end like Dallas Clark possibly?
I think that we're going to see the tight ends that are on the roster right now get their shot at making an impact early in training camp and the preseason. And, yeah, there could be another guy brought into the fold, but at this point, I think that there's already a lot of guys on the roster that are capable. So I think that a roster spot might be used elsewhere in the meantime.
All right. Oliver, thank you very much for that insight on both the tight end position and the wide receiver position for me. I appreciate it.
No problem. It's fun.
Oliver, I got one more question for you. I know over the weekend you wrote something about kind of a sleeper signing that happened over the spring that didn't get much attention, and that was a defensive end, Marcus Bennett. And I know that he had some success a couple of years ago in Cleveland. Then he's battled some injuries. He really hasn't played. Fill us in on what you think he could bring to the table.
I think that you're looking at a guy that, when healthy and during his prime with the Browns in 2010, he was used as a situational pass rusher in a 3-4 front off the edge as an outside linebacker. And I think that is where he was best used. And then when you saw the Browns switch to a 4-3 front, it kind of took him off the field. And so I think Bernard is a very good value signing for the Patriots when they got him for a reserve future contract after last season. And I think that you could kind of see him maybe find a role off the edge, but, it's going to be real tough. He's battling the likes of Jermaine Cunningham and a whole slew of guys that are all situational pass rushers, that maybe aren't great against the run, but they can get in the backfield.
All right. Well, some great insight there, Oliver. And before we let you go, please tell everyone where they can find you on the internet and on Twitter.
All right. Well, I write for I'm a contributor for Yahoo Sports. I'm also a staff writer for anypatriotsdraft.com, and I also am a featured columnist on Bleacher Report for the Patriots. And so on Twitter, you can follow me at Oliver B. Thomas.
Excellent. Oliver, thanks a lot for being on Patriots Central today. We really enjoyed it, and I'm sure we're going to have you on again as a guest in the future.
Thank you guys very much. I had a great time talking to you. Look forward to training camp.
Yeah, we're all looking forward to it, I'm sure.
Yeah, Oliver,
thanks again.
It would be great to meet you at training camp because Steve and I will be there. So hopefully we can find you at training camp.
Definitely, I'll have to make it down there.
Hi, I'm Zoltan Mesko from the New England Patriots, and you're listening to Patriots Central Radio.
And welcome back to Patriots Central Radio. I'm Steve Balestriei with co-host Russ Goldman today. And we just had an interesting guest in Oliver Thomas, a very talented writer who writes for anypatsdraft.com. And Russ, what do you think of some of his observations about upcoming training camp?
Well, the first thing that really stood out for me, Steve, is when I was asking him all those questions about the tight end position, he did a really detailed post on the tight ends, and I was fascinated that he's really high on Zach Sudfeld and Brandon Ford, two undrafted free agents, and gave us the reasons why. And I think that is what actually really interests me about the interview, along with the fact that I asked him about Dallas Clark, and he was of the feeling that the Patriots will look at all these tight ends first, and then evaluate, and then possibly bring in another tight end. I found that interesting.
Absolutely, and there's another guy that a lot of people have been talking about. Now we haven't heard anything from the team about this, but there's a guy that was built a lot like Aaron Hernandez physically, and that's Mark Harrison. And we could conceivably see him play that kind of hybrid wide receiver tight end role once the season, I should say, training camp starts. And I think they have plenty of options to go with. You never say never with the Patriots, and I think they've kicked the tires on Dallas Clark, and we could see him again.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's an interesting situation, Steve, because, again, Aaron Hernandez was extremely versatile, and as a player, and I'm just talking about him strictly as a player, he offered a great deal to the Patriots. Like you said, he could be more of a wide receiver. He could also be just a typical tight end. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle, I guess you could say, the two tight end set without Hernandez. Now, listen, they've done this before. They actually did it pretty effectively when Hernandez was hurt with Homan and also Daniel Phelps filling in along with Gronkowski. So it'll be interesting to see how they adapt to, I guess you could say, life without Hernandez.
Oh, absolutely. And it's going to be. I mean, it's going to be a work in progress. This was something that no one saw coming. I mean, they had planned on having him, as their main go-to guy at the start of training camp, and now he's not going to be there, and he's not going to be there forevermore. So now they're faced with some different situations. Eventually, we know Gronkowski will return this season, but it's going to be a work in progress until then. But I do think they have some weapons there, and they have some weapons at the wide receiver position. It's all going to depend on who steps up and, gains that trust with Tom Brady, because that's what it all comes down to in the end. If you have Tom Brady's trust, he will get you the football.
Right, Steve, but here's something that many fans aren't talking about and not putting into the conversation, and it would have to be the running back position. Everyone goes back to 2006 at how bad it was in 2006, and again, it wasn't good, but when you think about it, the Patriots still got to the AFC Championship game with Rashae Caldwell and Jabbar Gaffney as your main wide receivers. But I'm telling you right now, you have a huge upgrade at running back when you're talking about Shane Vereen and also Stephen Ridley. Now, Vereen, we've seen in small parts be able to shift out wide to a wide receiver position. That is an option for them at times as a wrinkle. And again, we saw that in the playoff game against the Texans. and he was very successful being out wide at times. So I know that the offense is going to be a work in progress, but I'm telling you, I could see them working around it with the running backs being more integral to the offense.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that we'll see a lot of that in camp. So let's get ready for our next guest. It's a guy I look forward to talking to because both of us follow him on Twitter. Both of us correspond with him on Twitter a lot. Russ Baxter. He's a veritable fountain of information with NFL history, and he goes by Pro Football Guru, and he is quite the guy. I'm looking forward to this next segment a lot.
Football fans, check out ProFootballCentral.com for all the latest NFL news and analysis. Also, check out the very popular Pro Football Central radio network for awesome NFL talk around the league. Go to ProFootballCentral.com. ProFootballCentral.com.
And welcome back to Patriots Central. We are very pleased to have our next guest. It's a guy who's absolutely swamped all the time. This guy writes more than anyone I know. He's all over Twitter. He writes for the Bleacher Report, Yahoo Sports, NFL Female, Cold Hard Football Facts. He's an NFL historian, and I'm sure I left out quite a few more. Russell Baxter, also known as the Pro Football Guru. Russ, welcome to Patriots Central.
Well, thank you very, very much. And it's very, very kind of funny that I'm on with two guys named Russ and Steve, because my full name is Russell Stephen Baxter.
Wow.
Now,
what are the odds of that? That's almost impossible.
That's outstanding. Well, Russ, let's just jump right into this. I know one of my favorite things that you do every day is you do a countdown. It's an NFL history thing that you do on Twitter, and it's like a countdown to the season. You always have some great tidbits and facts up there. What possessed you to start this originally?
Well, I was kind of toying around with different things to do on Twitter. I wasn't really into the social media scene so much a couple of years ago. I worked for ESPN for a long time, and then started to do stuff on my own and got back into writing, which is really how I got into this years and years ago. I worked as a pro football editor for a paper called College and Pro Football News Weekly years ago, and actually hired by a gentleman named Howie Schwab, who I'm sure people will know from ESPN and Stump to Schwab. And, of course, then Howie and I wound up working at ESPN together. So kind of experimenting with the social media and Twitter. I mean, as of about 2.5 years ago, a tweet to me is something, something Tweety Bird did when Sylvester was chasing him. So, we just started to do kind of create talking with different people. In actuality, my wife kind of chimed in as well. And, I have a fascination with stats and numbers and history. And it all just kind of came together. And so we count down to Super Bowls, and we count down to the Hall of Fame game. We count down to the draft. We count down to the start of the season. And, people chime in. And it's fun to watch because you've got, people who are historians, you have people who are diehard fans of their teams. You'd be amazed at some of the greatest numbers are. You have numbers like 88 and 34 and 32 and 12 always spark great debates. And then, of course, you have that contingent of fans who, regardless of the number, their player on their team wore it, and he's the greatest to ever play for the league.
Absolutely. I know I get involved with that every morning with you just about because, you put some of these facts up there and it brings me back. And I'm really dating myself, but I go back to the days at Fenway Park for the Patriots. So, a lot of those players in that era when you're a younger fan, you kind of remember those guys more so than you do the guys in the modern era. And the players of your childhood, and that's my favorite part of your, the stuff that you put up on Twitter with the history. Because
I appreciate that. I was going to say I love doing the history of pro football. It's fascinating. I think there's a lot of things that people don't know about it because It really took the National Football League a long time to become mainstream. I mean, we see the growth of it now, as you well know, and it's absolutely enormous. We're kind of in the dead time right now until we lead up to training camp. But this is about the only dead time of the year in terms of news, as you well know. Free agency changed a lot of things 20 years ago. There's no question about it. And but we're about 3 weeks away from going to the Hall of Fame. I'll be making the trek out to Canton, Ohio, and new inductees, and proud to see a couple of guys I used to work with, Chris Carter and Bill Parcells, get their rightful place in Canton, Ohio.
Yeah, those are some good names to be spending some time with. So, anyway, let me pass you right off to Russ. I know he has a bunch of questions for you, and let him get some equal time.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you. And this will be the most fascinating interview of all time as Russell speaks to Russ. Go ahead.
I was about to say, this doesn't happen often, Russ, that I could talk to another Russ. So what I want to do...
Well, Russ never sleeps. Isn't that the old song, Russ Never Sleeps?
That's right. That's right. That's right. Listen, Russell, everyone's been focusing on the Patriots' offense, but I actually want to focus on the defense with you because I think that's where the Patriots will either succeed or fail this season. So I'm going to start with you with a couple of questions. First, I want to ask you about defensive end Rob Ninkovich. I feel is an extremely underrated player. Last season, he had 8 sacks with 58 tackles while making some game-changing plays. I'm not going to compare him to Mike Vrabel, but believe it or not, he has similar statistics to Vrabel. What are your thoughts about Ninkovich?
Ninkovich is one of those guys who finds himself around the football a lot. And sometimes those are the guys you can't really measure with variables. Call it football instincts. The playmaking ability. I mean, sometimes you see guys who don't have this tremendous amount of tackles or tremendous amount of sacks. They have a steady line of everything. They'll have, like you said, 8 sacks, and they'll have 3 forced fumbles, and they'll have 2 fumble recoveries, and maybe 7 passes batted down, and maybe even a couple of interceptions. A guy like Chad Greenway from the Minnesota Vikings is that kind of a player. He also accumulates a lot of tackles because of the position he plays. But, all right, assist, fumble recovery, it's like, remember who leads the league NFL history, all-time interceptor is, of course, Paul Krause. And Paul Krause was a guy who just always found himself around the football. He won career interceptions. Were there guys who were probably more gifted athletically who played the position? No, but you can't teach football instincts, and I think Ninkovich is that style of player. And by the way, just to agree with your opening statement, I'm fascinated by the New England defense this year.
Oh, that's great. Well, going further into the defense, I want to concentrate at the outside linebacker position. Talk about Dante Hightower, who had a very good rookie season with the Patriots as he had 60 tackles with 4 sacks. Do you think he could have an expanded role this year, and we could actually see him getting after the quarterback more?
Yeah, I think because the one thing in the Super Bowl years, and I should say in the Super Bowl winning years for the Patriots in the early 2000s, not enough credit was ever given to New England's defense. I think we got so wrapped up in Belichick, Brady, and with good reason, okay, because there was absolutely a lot of clutch plays going on there, and Bill Belichick's defense, I think, sometimes got buried a little. But Teddy Bruschi, Mike Rabel, Richard Seymour, Ty Law, Rodney Harrison a little later. You go on and on and on. And you notice these are all veteran players. And Dante Hightower, only in his second season, but his role will expand because with Bill Belichick's defense, you've got to know your football to play that type of defense. And I love the balance that you're going to see with this New England defense all of a sudden because you have the Gerard Mayos and the Brandon Spikes and now Hightower at linebacker. And they brought in, to me, a couple of interesting veterans, especially Adrian Wilson to play strong safety. They throw in Chandler Jones, the second-year defensive end. There's a nice mix across the board of experience and youth. And dare I say, with what's going on with New England's offense, we could maybe see the New England defense, at least early in the season, Russ, maybe have to carry the load a little.
And you know what? That wouldn't surprise me because I've seen signs of this defense being able to win games, and that's the whole thing, Russell, is that the Patriots defense for me in the seasons after the Super Bowl championship victories have not really won enough games on defense, and I'm hoping that we finally start to see that. And it's funny that you mentioned Adrian Wilson, because I have a question for you about him, because several media people here in Boston were complaining that the Patriots actually signed Wilson instead of Ed Reed. My argument's been that Adrian Wilson was the better fit because he's more of the strong safety in the box safety that they really needed, and not the free safety because they have Devin McCourty. Would you agree with that logic?
I don't think there's any question about it. The Patriots need a little more oomph on defense, okay? I think they need to get back to that physical style of football that made them... So listen, when they won that Super Bowl against the... we know about the Brady drive. We know about the Vinatieri kick. We forget at how physical that defense was and really beat up the Rams that afternoon. And physical football is what wins in this league. Now you fast forward to the more modern-day Patriots, you know, who score 500 points annually a year. But they're not winning titles. And why is that? Because they're running into a Giants team that's more physical than them in the Super Bowl. And Bill Belichick knows that lesson more than anybody else, and I think, you know, maybe it's finally coming a little full circle here, but I agree with you. Is taking away the football a problem for the Patriots? It certainly wasn't last year. I want to say they had 41 takeaways, and they led the league in turnover differential. Ed Reed is a takeaway guy, but Adrian Wilson is a support guy, and Adrian Wilson, if called upon, remember, you know, a few years ago, earlier in his career, he was dynamite as a safety blitzer.
Yeah. No, he was, and it's funny because I saw things written that Rodney Harrison said about the fact that he actually really likes the fact that they brought in Adrian Wilson. That sold me. If Rodney's talking good about a player, I'm sold on him, and I'm looking forward to seeing how he fits, because I think they need that physicality like you just mentioned. I do want to finish with a flaw in the Patriots defense, and I'm curious if you feel the same way. A weakness in the Patriots defense the last couple seasons has been covering the tight ends. And I'm curious if you think someone like Adrian Wilson can be the solution, or maybe rookie Jamie Collins can fit that bill, because this has been an issue for a while.
Well, you know, the funny thing is it's funny you should bring that up, Russ, because I would say over the last couple of years, the Patriots defense has probably lost its confidence in covering tight ends just because of what they had to do in practice, trying to cover their own tight ends. Okay, so think of the irony of that. They've gone to a tight end oriented passing attack. You remember Rob Gronkowski's caught 37 touchdown passes the last 3 years and has a rushing touchdown in there somewhere as well. And yet that seems to be a little bit of a weakness of theirs and so on. And I think that comes with experience. You know, you'll notice defenses around the league that struggle to cover the tight end more times than not, Russ, are actually 3-4 defenses. And I think the fact that the Patriots, you know, have so many different looks and so on, maybe sometimes it's just a matter of confusion more than anything else. I mean, you can almost see Dallas Clark when he was with the Colts, you know, having his way with this defense, you know, the last 7 or 8 years, or however length you want to use it. But it's a good point. Listen, it's not going to be perfect right off the bat, but if they can get some of those plays made by the linebackers or a Wilson and so on, listen, the more versatility, the better. You know Bill Belichick when it comes to versatile football.
No, absolutely. That's why I wanted to bring up the subject of covering the tight ends, because it's been an issue. But again, they brought in a few more players, so hopefully they will make the difference. Listen, thank you again, Russell, for answering my questions. Hey, maybe we can do a show, Russ and Russ. I think that would be a hit.
You know what? That would be actually a pretty good concept, as a matter of fact. I kind of like that. You know. Hey, wait a minute. Why don't we find some other guy named Baxter with the first name Baxter, and we can do Russ and Steve and Baxter.
That's excellent. Yes, I would be all for that. Russ, we thank you very much for taking the time this morning, for being with us. And before we let you go, let people know where they can find you on the internet and on Twitter.
On Twitter, it's Dax Football Guru. on the internet, two places. ProFootballGuru.com is my website, and that will take you to everything I write for, from Bleacher Report to Yahoo, the Cold Hard Football Facts, to Gridiron Grid, as a matter of fact, a new site I just started up with next week. And if you're on Facebook, you can go to Pro Football Guru, like the page. You can get my Twitter feed on there as well, and you can get all the features that you get on ProFootballGuru.com. And guys, thanks very much for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Football fans, looking to get healthy this year? Now is the time, and I have the perfect place for you. Save 10% at onit.com/football radio. Exclusive PFC radio listeners save 10% off their order. That's onit.com, ONNIT.com/football radio.
And welcome back to Patriots Central. We now have another very special guest with us, Pat James from Fantasy Council. He also writes for SundaysOutForFootball.com. He's a fantasy football expert, and he's going to fill us in on, for you fantasy football guys out there, how to build your team this year. Pat, welcome to Patriots Central.
How's it going? Thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, thank you for being here. You're on with, I'm Steve Balestriei. You're also on with Russ Goldman. And let's jump right into it. I know our time is short today. Pat, if you're building a fantasy football team this year, where would you start?
Well, obviously, this year, I think the drop-off really comes in at running back early. So I like to build up on my running backs, possibly get one of those top 4 wide receivers. And then from there, the draft kind of gets sketchy. You don't know who's going to take what players. But it's definitely a year, in my opinion, to wait on quarterback. That's for sure.
Really? So that goes against a lot of conventional wisdom, because people usually try to start with an elite quarterback, but you'd say you'd go for a running back. Is there anyone that, if you had your choice right now of a running back, who would you take, probably other than Adrian Peterson? But what would be the guy you're looking for?
Well, some of those guys that are being taken in the first round that I really like is Doug Martin. He's getting 2 guards back in Carl Nix and Davin Joseph. He did a lot last year. Obviously, he had a tremendous rookie season. And I think now that his offensive line is healthy and the fact that he really doesn't have competition for carries, that makes him the number 2 back in my eyes. And I also like Jamal Charles. I think in leagues that award points for receptions, he's definitely going to be a hot commodity, and I like him 3rd. He's coming off my board 3rd. A guy that I'm kind of down on that many guys have at 2 is Arian Foster. He's had 900-plus carries over the last 3 years, and I think that's going to start to take a toll, and they might start to work Ben Tate in a little bit. So I'm a little bit down on Arian Foster, but I really like Doug Martin and Jamal Charles this year, right after Adrian Peterson.
Oh, that's a. I didn't expect to hear that, honestly. I'm a little surprised by that. That's cool. Now, if you're looking at a wide receiver, if you have a first choice of wide receiver, who would you be looking at to take there?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think the best wide receiver for fantasy purposes, and, I mean, in all reality, is definitely Calvin Johnson. He's going in the first round and early in most mock drafts that I've done. Around that 4, 5, 6 pick range, he's coming off the board because we've seen what he can do. And last year he had an amazing record-setting year. And then after that, I like Brandon Marshall, AJ Green, and also Dez Bryant. I think he really stepped it up a notch last year, and you're going to see Dez come into his own and be a pretty good fantasy wide receiver for the next few years. A guy that I'm down on is Julio Jones, and not necessarily because I don't think that he's a special talent, because he definitely is. But there's just a lot of mouths to feed in Atlanta, and I've been noticing that a lot of guys are taking, because I do mock drafts all the time in these analyst mock drafts, these writer mock drafts, and I've noticed that a lot of guys are high on Julio Jones, but I just think that he's got 2 players on his team right now that are targeted more often than he is, in Tony Gonzalez and Roddy White, and they just added Steven Jackson. So I think Matt Ryan's going to spread the ball around a little bit, and Julio Jones is probably down near the 6th or 7th best receiver. And I've seen guys taking him high, like 3rd, 4th, but I think he's being overvalued a little bit.
Now, are there any rookies out there that you think are going to make an immediate impact in the fantasy leagues this year?
To be honest, I think we were spoiled last year with all the rookies that stepped up. Obviously, Doug Martin and Alfred Morris from the running back position, but then we had a ton of quarterbacks: Robert Griffin, Andrew Luck, Russell Wilson, guys that really definitely kind of piqued the interest of fantasy footballers, and I think that's going to carry over into this year. You're going to see some guys being drafted a little bit higher than they should, but I think Le'Veon Bell, running back for the Steelers, he's obviously going to have the opportunity to play. He's not competing for much against much in Pittsburgh with Jonathan Dwyer and Isaac Redman, and everybody loves Monty Ball out in Denver, but I really think that they need to temper their expectations with Ball. Those guys are actually going around round 4 or 5, so it's a pretty steep price to pay for a guy that you haven't seen take an NFL snap yet, but it did pay off last year with Doug Martin, so you never know. But I think that we are spoiled last year, and the production and value isn't going to be the same.
Okay, let me pass you off to Russ. I know he had a question for you about defense.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yes, hi, Pat. I actually have 2 questions about defense. First, I just want to start you off talking about the Patriots. You have them ranked number 5 in your preseason rankings, which I find very interesting because I don't see them watching football as a number 5 defense, but fantasy, they translate much better. Could you just explain how fantasy is a little bit different than, say, watching football, the actual team on the field?
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of times a defense can be very turnover heavy, like the Patriots were last year. They had 20 interceptions and 21 fumble recoveries, and you're going to earn points for that on a fantasy team, whereas they didn't earn points for that, obviously, in the real game, and sometimes teams give up more points, give up more yards, where that doesn't necessarily affect them as much from a fantasy perspective. You may be able to earn points based on how many points you've given up, but if you're a team that's very opportunistic with turnovers, scoring, have a good returner on special teams, you're going to get more points from a fantasy perspective as far as that goes, instead of whereas in real life you just want a defense that is going to not give up points, not give up yards. Right,
exactly. And I always find the fantasy point system interesting compared to, I guess you could say, compared to what actually happens on the field. And that leads me to my next question about defense, because you have the Denver Broncos as being number 1, and I got to be honest with you, Pat. I don't think of them as a number 1 defense, but fantasy, they must be doing something right, correct?
Yeah, they really get after the quarterback. Obviously, they have Von Miller. He's a great playmaker, and I think this year in particular, they kind of shored up their run defense up front. And the sacks is something that's a hot commodity in fantasy. When you have a guy like Von Miller, obviously they did lose Elvis Dumerville. That'll hurt. But I like the Denver Broncos. I think that they're going to improve as a fantasy defense.
Okay, great. One final question. I wanted to ask you about the Patriots running backs, Ridley and Vereen, because of the situation that the Patriots might have at the beginning of the season with the wide receiver position and the tight ends. Could Vereen and Ridley be good backs, as I guess you could say, maybe backups or even potential starters in fantasy?
Oh, absolutely, and I'm glad you asked that question, because it's something that I've actually been touting on Twitter and everywhere else that I'm located. I really am a huge fan of Shane Vereen this year. I think last year, as you guys well know, he had a coming out party in that divisional game against the Texans when Woodhead was down 3 touchdowns. I think he showed Belichick in that game that he can catch the ball out of the backfield. And I really think that right now he's probably going somewhere in like the 7th, 8th round. I've seen him creep up into the 6th round in certain mock drafts. But I think if fumbleitis becomes a problem for Ridley, which he had issues with it last year, I really think Shane Vereen could definitely be at least your number 2 running back in fantasy. But that's not to knock Shane Vereen at all. He may give a little way to Vereen this year, and he's not really a pass catching back. But with the attrition they've had at wide receiver, I could see a lot of 2-back sets, and I could see Shane Vereen and Stephen Ridley both being very good fantasy assets for fantasy players this year.
Well, that's great. I was very curious about that. I've been actually touting that fantasy players should be drafting those players. So
absolutely,
I'm glad that you backed me up on that. Thanks again.
No problem.
So, Pat, before we let you go, we really appreciate you coming on Patriots Central today, because I, for one, I'm a terrible fantasy football player, so I always like getting tips from the guys who know their stuff. So we really thank you for that. And before we let you go, please let people know where they can find you on the internet and on Twitter.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys. It was a pleasure. I'll come on and talk anytime. They can find me on Twitter at TFC_Pat James. My website is fantasycouncil.com. But my stuff's all over the place. You could also find me, as you guys said, on SundaysAreForFootball.com. I host a couple podcasts. I'm guest on a couple podcasts. You just Google Pat James Fantasy Council, and you can find my work in a second.
Well, thank you very much again for being a guest on Patriots Central. We hope to have you on again real soon.
All right, thanks. Thanks for having me, guys.
Cigar fans, check out fifthdowncigar.com and enter the coupon code PFC to get 10% off your order. Lots of nice high-end cigars. That's fifthdowncigar.com. Enter the code PFC for 10% off your order.
And thanks again to Pat James, our last guest on Patriots Central today. He gave us some really great insight on the fantasy game. Thanks to Russell Baxter and to Oliver Thomas. Before we go, Russ, let people know how we can find you on Twitter and on the internet.
Sure, they can find me at Russ_Goldman on Twitter. They can also find my show, which is Patriots 4th and 2, on blogtalkradio.com that I do with you, Steve. Can also find us on blogtalkradio.com doing the AFC East breakdown.
Excellent. Russ, thank you so much for being our guest host today. Jeremy couldn't be here, and it was a pleasure, as always, for you filling us in. And you can find us at Patriots Central on Twitter, and you can also find us at Pro Football Central on Twitter. My Twitter handle is SteveB7SFG. Thank you for listening to Patriots Central. Be sure to send in your questions to Twitter, and we'll try to answer them on an upcoming podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to Patriots Central. For Patriots news, blogs, highlights, and more, log on to ProFootballCentral.com.